Most people see a man in a stained apron. They see a $12 an hour ghost. But when the CEO saw the rhythmic dance of his blade at 3 a.m., she realized she wasn't looking at a prep cook. She was looking at a world-class chef hiding a heartbreaking secret. This is the story of the secret genius. If you believe that true talent can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support helps us tell the stories of those who work in silence. The clock on the grease-splattered wall of the Midtown Industrial Kitchen groaned as it struck 3:00 a.m. This was the dead hour, the time when the city's neon lights flicker, and the only sound is the hum of a dying ventilation system. The air was heavy, smelling of cold bleach and burnt fryer oil. It was a place designed to be forgettable, a concrete box where humans are treated as replaceable parts in a corporate machine. Under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights stood Wendy Hill. He was a tall, lean black man with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the entire building. He wore a faded black t-shirt and non-slip shoes with soles so worn they had lost their grip. To the rest of the world, Wendy was just another night shift worker, a man without a face or a future. But Wendy had a secret, and it was hidden in his hands. Wendy wasn't just working, he was performing. As his knife met the cutting board, it didn't make a clumsy thumping sound. Instead, it was a rapid, melodic staccato, tap, 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 tap. His left hand was locked in a perfect claw grip, a technique where the fingertips are tucked inward to protect them, while the knuckles guide the blade with microscopic accuracy. This was the how of a master, a skill forged in the fires of elite culinary schools, not picked up in a fast food training video. In the shadows near the walk-in freezer, Cara Carter stood paralyzed. She was the CEO of the multi-million-dollar empire that owned this kitchen, but tonight, she was disguised in a maintenance uniform, her hands raw from scrubbing grease traps. Why was she there? She came to investigate a failing branch, expecting to find lazy staff and wasted food. Instead, she found a man who was clearly overqualified for his own existence. She realized she was watching a genius working for pennies. The what of the tragedy unfolded when the heavy metal door swung open. Derek, the night shift manager, walked in with the arrogance of a man who loved his small amount of power. He didn't even look Wendy in the eye. "Hill, stop wasting time on those onions," Derek barked. "The delivery truck is here. Go unload the crates. Now." Wendy didn't argue. He didn't mention his talent or his history. He simply set his knife down with a quiet, practiced grace, wiped his hands, and walked into the freezing night to do back-breaking labor. Cara watched him leave, her heart sinking. She looked down at the pile of onions Wendy had left behind. They weren't just chopped, they were curated. Each slice was identical to the millimeter, a testament to a level of discipline that shouldn't exist in a place like this. The mystery began to burn in her mind. Why would a man with the hands of a king accept the life of a servant? Cara knew right then that her mission had changed. This wasn't about a failing branch anymore. It was about the man the world had chosen not to see. As the first week of Cara's undercover mission bled into the second, the atmosphere in the Midtown kitchen felt increasingly heavy. It was always the same. 1:45 a.m., the world outside was a void of darkness, and the kitchen was a cold island of fluorescent light. The hum of the dying ventilation system became the heartbeat of their shift. While the other night crew members arrived dragging their feet, already counting the minutes until they could leave, Wendy was always there first. He was a silent sentinel, already halfway through his prep work before the clock even struck 2. Wendy Hill was a man of few words, but his actions began to speak volumes to Cara. She noticed that Wendy wasn't just a worker. He was a natural leader who refused to acknowledge his own power. Who was he to the other workers? He was their safety net. Cara watched as a young new hire named Tyler struggled at the station next to Wendy. Tyler was barely 19, his hands shaking as he tried to portion chicken breasts under the watchful, predatory eye of the manager. Tyler was failing, and he knew it. But before the manager could pounce, Wendy stepped in. He didn't lecture. He simply placed a calm, grounding hand on the cutting board and said, "Don't rush. The chicken isn't going anywhere." In 30 seconds, Wendy taught the boy a technique that usually takes months to master. He was a masterclass teacher hiding in a graveyard shift. How did Wendy's genius manifest during these long hours? It wasn't just the knife work anymore. Cara observed how Wendy organized the walk-in cooler with the efficiency of a high-end logistics manager. He tracked inventory in his head, noticing waste that even the digital systems missed. He moved with a muscle memory that was out of place. He would reach for a seasoning or a tool without looking, his body anticipating the needs of a kitchen that was far more complex than this one. Every movement was economical, no wasted breath, no wasted energy. It was the how of a man who had once commanded a brigade of 40 chefs, now applied to a pile of plastic containers. Cara Carter, the Undercover CEO, was no longer just collecting data on operational efficiency. She was now investigating a human tragedy. Why would a man with this level of mastery accept a $12 an hour dead-end job? She began to notice the small glitches in Wendy's stoic armor. Every hour on the hour, his phone would vibrate in his pocket. He wouldn't answer, but he would steal a 5-second glance at the screen. Cara caught a glimpse of the display once. It was a home security camera feed showing a small, dimly lit bedroom and a child sleeping. The why started to take shape in her mind. Wendy wasn't choosing the night shift because he liked the isolation. He was choosing it because it was the only way he could be a father and a provider at the same time. The what of the story's conflict reached a boiling point on a rainy Thursday morning. Derek, the night manager, was in a foul mood. He decided to punish the crew for a minor inventory error he had actually made himself. He pointed at Wendy, who had already finished 4 hours of grueling prep work. "Hill, unload the freezer truck. The lift is broken, so you're doing it by hand. Now." Cara watched in horror as Wendy, whose hands were already cramped from the knife, walked out into the freezing rain without a word of protest. Derek didn't see a genius. He saw a machine that didn't complain. He saw a labor cost that could be pushed to the breaking point. This was the systemic erasure Cara had unknowingly designed from her corporate office, and now she was witnessing the human cost. The mystery took a final, heart-wrenching turn when Cara followed Wendy to the parking lot at 6:00 a.m. She saw him sit in his rusted dark blue sedan, his head resting against the steering wheel in total exhaustion. Through the back window, she saw a child's car seat and a worn-out teddy bear. Why did he stay? Because in this city, on this salary, there was no other way to pay for his mother's medication and his son's safety. He had buried the executive chef to save the father. As Wendy drove away, Cara stood in the rain, realizing that the man she was about to restructure, out of a job, was actually the most valuable person she had ever met. The third week of the mission began on a cold, rain-slicked Monday. The clock hit 4:00 a.m., the hour where exhaustion usually sets in for the night crew. In the midtown kitchen, the air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood from the meat prep station. While the other workers drifted toward the break room to scroll through their phones, Wendy and Cara remained in the workspace, two ghosts moving in parallel. It was during these quiet hours that the where shifted from a mere workplace to a confession booth. Who was Wendy Hill before he became a number on a payroll? The first real clue came from Tyler, the young hire Wendy had mentored. While Wendy was in the walk-in cooler, Tyler leaned over to Cara. "You know he's not supposed to be here, right?" he whispered. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed her an old, grainy digital article from 5 years ago. It was a photo of the opening night of Bellamy, the city's most prestigious 5-star restaurant. In the center was a world-renowned head chef, and standing right beside him, younger, smiling, and wearing the white coat of an executive sous chef, was Wendy Hill. The man currently scrubbing a floor drain was once one of the most promising culinary minds in the country. How does a man lose everything but keep his skill? Cara watched Wendy return from the cooler. He didn't know she had seen the photo. He picked up his knife, and Cara saw it clearly now. The way he handled the blade wasn't just good, it was a language. He was communicating with the food. He trimmed a brisket with such economy of motion that there was zero waste. In a high-end kitchen, this saved thousands of dollars. Here, it was an ignored miracle. He moved with a rhythm of the line, a specific way of stepping and turning that only those who have survived the weeds of a busy service ever master. Cara, the undercover CEO, felt a sickening realization. Why had she never seen him in her reports? She realized that her own corporate systems were designed to hide people like Wendy. Her HR software filtered for low-cost labor and high-retention metrics. Wendy was a perfect employee on paper because he never complained and never asked for more. She was looking into a mirror and seeing the flaw in her own leadership. She had created a system that reduced human geniuses to labor units. She watched Wendy work and thought about the $1.2 million efficiency plan she had approved just last month, the very plan that was about to eliminate Wendy's night shift. The what of Wendy's current life was a brutal balancing act. On this night, the manager, Derek, was screaming about a late shipment. He didn't notice that Wendy was shivering. Cara realized Wendy hadn't eaten his own meal. He had packed it into a container to take home. The conflict wasn't just between a boss and an employee. It was between a man's pride and his survival. Derek ordered Wendy to clean the grease traps, the filthiest job in the building, as a reward for finishing his prep early. Wendy simply nodded. Cara watched as the hands that once plated $200 entrees reached into the sludge. The injustice was no longer a statistic. It was a physical weight in Cara's chest. The why finally broke open during a rare 10-minute overlap at the sinks. Cara asked him, "Why don't you go back to the big kitchens? Bellamy's? I've heard of it." Wendy's hands stopped moving in the soapy water. He didn't look at her. "Bellamy doesn't have a night shift for prep cooks," he said quietly. "And my son doesn't have a father who can be home at 6:00 p.m. My mother needs her medicine at noon. You can't run a 5-star kitchen and be a 5-star father at the same time. Not in my world." He chose the shadows. Why? Because the light was too expensive for a single dad with no help. As he walked away to clock out, Cara realized the secret genius wasn't hiding because he was ashamed. He was hiding because he was the only thing holding his family together. It was a Thursday morning, around 4:45 a.m., when the atmosphere in the Midtown kitchen turned from exhausted to volatile. The ware had become a pressure cooker. Outside, a biting sleet began to fall, rattling against the thin industrial windows. Inside, the heating system had failed, leaving the kitchen staff breathing out clouds of mist as they worked. This was the hour when mistakes happen, when the body's internal clock screams for sleep and the mind begins to fray. Who was Wendy Hill under this kind of pressure? For the first time, Cara saw the secret genius waver. Wendy had been on his feet for 10 hours. He had finished his prep, unloaded a delivery truck in the freezing rain, and was now back at the cutting board. Cara noticed a slight tremor in his left hand, the hand that held the perfect claw grip. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, were glazed with a level of fatigue that was dangerous. He was a man running on nothing but sheer willpower, and the thought of the 4-year-old boy waiting for him at home. How does a master maintain his craft when his body is failing? Cara watched as Wendy stopped. He didn't drop his guard, he reset it. He took a deep breath, dipped his hands in ice-cold water to shock his nerves back to life, and wiped his blade. Even in his state of near collapse, he refused to produce mediocre work. He began to julienne bell peppers, and despite the cold and the exhaustion, the knife moved with a rhythmic shick-shick-shick. It was a masterclass in discipline. He wasn't just cutting vegetables. He was fighting to keep his soul intact. Cara, the undercover CEO, was no longer just a witness. She was feeling the why behind her own guilt. Why was she still there? She had enough information to fire the manager and promote Wendy 10 times over. But she realized that if she left now, she would miss the most important lesson of her life. She was seeing the human cost of her own corporate restructuring plans. She looked at her hands, covered in chemical burns from the cleaning fluids, and then at Wendy. She realized that her $1.2 million efficiency plan was actually a plan to destroy the only thing that kept men like Wendy alive: their dignity. The what of the conflict reached a breaking point when Derek, the manager, stormed into the kitchen. He was stressed because the regional director was coming for an inspection. He looked for someone to blame for the cold, for the late truck, for his own inadequacy. He chose Wendy. "Hill, I told you to mop the freezer floor. Why is there still ice?" Derek screamed, stepping into Wendy's personal space. Wendy didn't look up. "I unloaded the truck first, as you ordered, sir. I'm heading to the freezer now." "Don't give me excuses." Derek shoved a bucket of hot water toward Wendy, splashing his worn-out shoes. "Do it now, or don't bother coming in tomorrow." Cara felt the blood boil in her veins. The conflict was no longer professional. It was a violation of human decency. The why of Wendy's endurance was finally laid bare in the break room 10 minutes later. Wendy had sat down for a rare moment of rest. His phone buzzed. This time, he answered. Cara, standing by the lockers, heard him whisper, "I know, baby. Daddy will be home soon. Just stay in bed. Grandma is right there." His voice was a mix of heartbreak and iron. He hung up and looked at Cara. He didn't know she was the CEO. He just saw a fellow worker. "My son has a fever," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But if I leave, Derek fires me. If he fires me, we lose the apartment. If we lose the apartment, I can't keep my mother's oxygen running." Why was he a secret genius? Because he was a hero who had no choice but to be invisible. As Wendy stood up to mop a freezer floor in the middle of a feverish night, Cara realized that the system wasn't broken. It was designed to ignore the very people who made it work. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks since Cara had first stepped into the Midtown kitchen. The where had become a place of profound internal conflict for her. Outside, the city was gripped by a late-season snowstorm, turning the streets into a white void. Inside, the kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and ammonia. This was the night the restructuring was no longer a plan on a laptop. It was a reality that was about to be executed. Who was Wendy Hill on this night? He looked like a man who knew his time was running out. Rumors of the layoffs had finally reached the night crew. While the other workers were angry, talking loudly about corporate greed in the break room, Wendy was at his station. He was working with a desperate, quiet intensity. Cara watched him sharpen his knife, a slow, rhythmic shook against the whetstone. It was a funeral march for a career he was about to lose for the second time. He was a master, preparing for his final performance in the dark. How do you maintain perfection when you know you're about to be discarded? Cara watched Wendy prep a complex mirepoix for the morning shift. Despite the cold, despite the looming threat of unemployment, his cuts were still surgical. He was using a technique called the draw stroke, a movement so smooth and precise that the vegetables seemed to fall apart under his touch. It was a how that belonged in a palace, not a failing branch. He wasn't doing it for the company. He was doing it for the craft. To Wendy, the quality of his work was the only thing the world couldn't take away from him. Cara, the undercover CEO, was standing by the industrial sink, her hands shaking. Why was she still hiding? She had spent 21 nights watching this man. She had seen him mentor the youth, endure the manager's abuse, and sacrifice his sleep for a son who didn't even know his father was a king in a kitchen. She looked at the efficiency report she had to finalize by morning. Her name was at the top. She realized she wasn't just an observer. She was the architect of Wendy's destruction. The why of her mission had transformed from saving a branch to saving a soul. She saw the human capital she had talked about in boardrooms as a living, breathing man with a feverish son at home. The what of the conflict arrived in the form of a physical document. Derek, the manager, walked into the kitchen holding a stack of envelopes. He looked excited, the kind of excitement a small man feels when he finally has the power to destroy someone better than him. "Listen up," Derek shouted over the hum of the fridge. "Corporate finalized the cuts. The night shift is gone as of Friday. Hill, you're on the list. Maintenance, you're gone too." He tossed the envelope onto Wendy's wet cutting board, right next to the perfectly julienned peppers. The conflict was no longer a mystery. It was an eviction notice from life. Wendy didn't even look up. He just kept cutting, though Cara saw a single drop of sweat, or maybe a tear, hit the board. The why of the entire journey reached its climax in that moment. Cara watched Derek laugh as he walked away, leaving Wendy standing in the wreckage of his survival plan. Wendy stopped. He looked at his hands, the hands of an executive chef, now wet with the juice of onions and the filth of a kitchen that didn't want him. Why did he stay silent? Because he was a man of honor in a world that traded honor for margins. Cara knew she couldn't wait until the morning. She couldn't wait for a board meeting. As Wendy reached for his coat to leave, defeated, Cara stepped out from the shadows of the mop closet. She didn't look like a maintenance worker anymore. She looked like a woman who had found her purpose. The mystery of why a genius would hide was solved. Now, the mystery was what a CEO would do to fix it. The clock on the wall hit 5:15 a.m. The snow outside had turned the world into a silent white tomb, but inside the Midtown kitchen, the air was electric. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows against the stainless steel. Wendy was standing at the back exit, his worn-out jacket half-zipped, holding the envelope that contained his termination. Where was supposed to be the place where his hopes died? But Cara Carter was about to turn this failing kitchen into a courtroom. Who was Wendy Hill in this moment? He was a man who had accepted his fate. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow. He had spent years building a wall of invisibility around his talent to protect his family, and now that wall had been knocked down by a corporate memo. He was ready to walk out into the snow and vanish into another graveyard shift at another nameless warehouse. He was a king who had lost his crown twice, and he didn't have the strength to fight for it a third time. How did Cara change the world in a single second? She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She simply walked to the center of the kitchen, pulled the dirty maintenance cap from her head, and stood tall. Her posture changed. The slouch of a tired cleaner vanished, replaced by the commanding presence of a woman who ran a billion-dollar empire. "Wendy, put the envelope down," she said. Her voice wasn't the tired rasp of a maintenance worker anymore. It was clear, resonant, and absolute. "And Derek, stay exactly where you are." Derek, the manager, laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "What are you doing, 402? Get back to the mop. You're fired anyway." Cara didn't blink. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a gold-plated executive ID and a cell phone. She hit a button, and within seconds the branch's main lights, the bright, warm ones usually reserved for customers, slammed on. The who of the conflict shifted instantly to Derek. Why did his face turn a ghostly shade of white? Because he watched as the woman he had spent weeks insulting began to recite his own employee ID number, his hire date, and the exact dollar amount of the inventory discrepancies he had tried to pin on Wendy. "I am Cara Carter," she said, her eyes boring into him. "I am the CEO of this company, and I have spent 21 nights watching you treat a master of his craft like a piece of garbage." Derek's knees buckled. He looked at the mop, then at Wendy, then at the woman who could end his career with a single email. The why of Cara's mission was now fully visible. She wasn't just there to save money. She was there to salvage the humanity she had lost in her own boardroom. The what of the climax was Wendy's reaction. He didn't jump for joy. He didn't thank her. He stepped back, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You were lying," he whispered. "Every night, you were just watching me, like I was an experiment." This was the true conflict. Wendy didn't care about the CEO's power. He cared about the trust they had built in the quiet hours of 4:00 a.m. Cara realized that her reveal had hurt the one person she wanted to help. The conflict wasn't between the CEO and the manager anymore. It was between a woman seeking redemption and a man who had forgotten how to trust the world. The why of Cara's next move was the most important moment of the story. She ignored Derek entirely. She walked toward Wendy and stopped exactly 3 feet away, respecting his space. "I wasn't watching an experiment, Wendy," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "I was watching a man do what I forgot how to do. I was watching someone work with honor when no one was looking. I didn't come here to find a chef. I came here because I was lost, and your hands, the way you cut those onions at 3:00 in the morning, they showed me what this company is supposed to be about." Why did she choose this moment? Because she realized that Wendy Hill wasn't just a secret genius with a knife. He was the heart of her company, a heart she had nearly cut out with a restructuring memo. The clock on the wall hit 6:30 a.m. The harsh fluorescent lights of the night shift had been replaced by the soft, gray light of a snowy dawn filtering through the high windows. The Ware was no longer a hidden industrial kitchen. It had become a center for a life-altering negotiation. The kitchen was quiet now. The morning crew hadn't arrived yet, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of a snowplow on the street outside. Who was Wendy Hill after the shock of the reveal? He sat at a stainless steel prep table, his hands folded. He looked smaller now that the secret was out. For years, his invisibility had been his armor. It allowed him to work, to provide, and to disappear into his responsibilities without anyone asking questions about his past or his pain. Now, looking at the CEO standing before him, he felt exposed. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be restored. Being a legend meant pressure, expectations, and time, 3 things he had sacrificed to be a father. How did Cara begin the process of justice? Before she spoke to Wendy's future, she addressed the present. She looked at Derek, who was still standing by the door, trembling. "Derek," Cara said, her voice like ice. "I've spent 3 weeks watching you. I've seen you falsify inventory logs to cover your own waste. I've seen you harass staff. And I've seen you treat a man 10 times your superior like a servant." She didn't wait for an excuse. She handed him his own phone. "Call your regional manager. Tell him you're resigning, effective immediately. If you don't, the police will be here in 20 minutes to discuss the missing, high-end steaks from last Tuesday's delivery." The how was swift and absolute. Derek vanished into the locker room, his power stripped away in seconds. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt clean. Cara, the CEO, then turned back to Wendy. Why was she doing this? It wasn't just corporate charity. She pulled out a folder she had hidden in her maintenance locker. Inside was a contract for a new position, National Director of Culinary Operations. "Wendy," she said softly, "I didn't just see a good cook. I saw a man who knows how to teach. I saw you with Tyler. I saw how you managed this kitchen's waste better than our software. I want you to design the menus for every branch we own. I want you to train every head chef in the company." The why was clear. She wanted to inject his secret genius into the very DNA of her empire. She wasn't just giving him a job. She was giving him the power to ensure no one else would ever be invisible in her kitchens again. The what of the conflict was the one thing Cara hadn't considered. Wendy looked at the six-figure salary on the contract. He looked at the title. Then he pushed it back toward her. "I can't," he whispered. Cara was stunned. "Why? It's everything you used to have at Bellamy's and more." "Because directors work 80 hours a week," Wendy said, his voice rising with emotion. "Directors travel. Directors are in meetings when their sons wake up with fevers. If I take this, I lose the only thing that matters. I'd rather chop onions at 3 a.m. and be there for my boy than be a legend and be a stranger to him." This was the ultimate conflict, the clash between professional restoration and the sacred duty of a father. The why of the final resolution began with Cara's smile, a genuine, warm smile. She had expected this. "That's why the contract says the office is wherever you are," she said. "The kitchen at the headquarters will have a daycare. You set your own hours. You work from home 4 days a week. And your first task, designing a single-parent support program for our 12,000 employees." Why did she go this far? Because she realized that the genius of Wendy Hill wasn't just in his knife skills, it was in his heart. She needed that heart in her boardroom. Wendy looked at the contract again. He looked at the snow outside, then at the photo of his son on his phone. For the first time in 5 years, the secret genius didn't feel like he had to hide. He picked up a pen. The clock on the wall of the corporate headquarters read 7:00 a.m. The setting was a far cry from the dim, grease-stained kitchen in Midtown. Here, the windows were floor-to-ceiling, looking out over a city that was just beginning to wake up. The air didn't smell like bleach and old oil. It smelled like fresh roasted coffee and high-end cedar. But even in this glass and steel, where? The spirit of the 3 a.m. kitchen remained. This was the headquarters of a company that had undergone a soul-level transformation. Who was Wendy Hill now? He was no longer a ghost in a worn-out apron. He stood in a professional chef's coat, crisp, white, and bearing the company's logo over his heart. But he hadn't changed his essence. He still carried a small paring knife in his pocket, a reminder of the years he spent in the dark. Beside him stood his son, now 5 years old, holding a small plastic spatula. Wendy was no longer just a secret genius. He was a visible leader, a man who had successfully integrated his mastery of the kitchen with his devotion as a father. How had the company changed under Wendy's influence? It wasn't just about the menus, although the food quality had skyrocketed, leading to record-breaking profits. The real how was the invisible worker protocol Wendy had designed. He had implemented a system where every night shift worker, every dishwasher, and every prep cook was seen. He spent 3 nights a week visiting branches undercover, not to catch people doing wrong, like Cara once had, but to find the genius in the shadows. He had turned the corporate ladder into a bridge, ensuring that talent was recognized regardless of the shift or the zip code. Cara Carter, the CEO, stood at her office window, watching Wendy walk across the courtyard with his son. Why did she feel more successful now than when the company's stock was at its peak? Because she had learned that the most valuable asset in her empire wasn't the real estate or the brand. It was the dignity of her people. She had shifted the company's why from efficiency to humanity. She realized that by saving one man's career, she had saved her own legacy. She was no longer a woman who managed numbers. She was a leader who managed lives. The what of the story's conclusion took place back at the Midtown branch. The kitchen had been completely renovated. There was a new manager there, Tyler, the young man Wendy had once mentored. Cara and Wendy had returned for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. On the wall of the kitchen, there was now a plaque. It didn't have a corporate logo on it. Instead, it bore an image of a chef's knife and the words, "Dedicated to those who work in the silence of the night, you are seen." The conflict that had started in the dark had ended in a light that reached every corner of the company. The final why of the secret genius is a message for everyone. Why does this story matter? Because every day we walk past people carrying more than we will ever know. We pass the Wendy's of the world in the grocery store, in the parking lots, and in the quiet hours of the morning. Sometimes the strongest people don't need to be saved. They just need to be seen. Wendy's story wasn't just about a chef reclaiming his crown. It was about a world learning to look closer. As the screen fades to black, the rhythmic sound of a knife hitting a cutting board returns. Tap, 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 tap. A reminder that somewhere right now, a genius is working in the dark, waiting for someone to notice. You don't have to be a CEO to change someone's life. You just have to be the person who stops, looks, and decides that what you see matters. If Wendy's journey touched you, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, subscribe and hit the bell. Every week, we find another story that deserves to be told. Thanks for watching.